every year my appreciation for IICD has gone up. And it also took me 3 years to figure out what the secret of IICD is. And I believe that secret is that it is not about ICT. So what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is to explain what I mean by that, talk a little bit about in the context of ICT for a greener economy, and also celebrate IICD's 15th anniversary by using their logo as my outline. So you'll notice there are 3 words at the bottom in smaller font: people, ICT, and development. And I'll start with ICT, which is what we have all been talking about so far. Now, with respect to a greener economy, there's lots of different ways that you can use ICT to help with, let's say, better use of energy. In many developed countries now, the power companies are installing smart meters to your house so that you can get a sense for how much energy usage, how you're using energy during the day. And one of the things that people have found is that if you can find a way to compare your usage with that of your neighbors, people tend to become more conservative. There's something about competitive pressure and peer pressure that causes people to want to lessen their power usage. Other uses of ICT for a greener economy might include sensors for monitoring climate. This is a sensor that they are using in Costa Rica, actually, where they're able to monitor, for example, carbon dioxide levels at various different points within a forest and see how that evolves as a result of changes in climate. And then, of course, one of the things that I've discovered is the greatest consumer of fossil fuels is air travel. And one thing you can do with ICT, of course, is to decrease the degree to which you travel by air. This particular project is actually a teleconferencing system that was set up by UC Berkeley for Aravind Eye Hospital, where they use teleconferencing to connect rural clinics with hospitals in the city. Now, one of the things about all of these examples I've shown you these are all examples of how ICT can be used for positive use for a greener economy. But it's not necessarily the case that they always are put to that positive use. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about development this time and on the kind of unintended consequences of development which happen if you don't pay attention to them. Many of the speakers before have already talked about e-waste. This is one of the side effects, and it's not just a problem that happens within a country, it actually happens on an international scale. So many developing countries will effectively accept e-waste from developed countries in return for payment. And what ends up happening with these, with the junk, is that local people will end up burning off the plastic, causing a lot of toxicity and pollution in the air, and then selling the rare metals for very low cost. The other side of our ICT is that no matter what, it is a constant consumer of energy. So this is a Google data center. One of the more amazing statistics that I heard recently is that in the United States, data centers consume something like between 1 to 2% of the total energy consumption of the country. And I believe that number is roughly the same in many developed countries. If you think about it, that is amazing. 10 years ago, there was really nothing called a data center. And now we're in a situation where a significant percentage of the energy use of developed countries is in this very new technology. And so we have to very quickly find ways to alleviate that, or we will end up only accelerating the rate at which we consume fossil fuels. Finally, there's a tendency to think of these problems as problems of efficiency. So if we could only make our computation more efficient, then somehow we would be able to solve the problems. But there's a interesting paradox called Jevons paradox, first discussed by an economist in the United Kingdom. And basically what he discovered was with coal, as the use of coal for industry became cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, people only used more and more and more of it, so that the absolute amount of fossil fuels burnt increased as efficiency went up. So something always needs to be done in addition to increasing efficiency in order to counter the effect of too much consumption. And that's where I want to mention a particular theory that I subscribe to with regards to ICT and human and institutions, human beings and institutions. And that is basically that technology magnifies what people want to do, what institutions tend to do. And it's very important that this is understood not just in the positive sense of amplifying what people can do, but also in the sense that the technology never substitutes for human intention. You cannot take an institution that is intent on, let's say, consuming more resources and somehow expect that the technology will change that intent. Ultimately, that intent has to change from within a human being. One way I illustrate that is by suggesting that nobody considers if you have a for-profit company that is failing, that is not able to make a profit, nobody suggests that we should buy lots of new hardware, buy a new data center, and imagine that the technology is going to turn that company around. Ultimately, the change has to come through leadership, through management, through individual employees. And the same is true for everything in development, which is to say, you can't fix a broken system with technology, although there are many cases when technology can amplify what a good organization is already doing. And that brings me to the third component in IICD's logo, and that's people. And this is where I really have a tremendous amount of respect for what IICD does and how it does it. And this is also the reason why I suggested that IICD is not really about ICT. So when we think about ICT for development, the tendency is to focus on the technology. So in the case of mobile phones, you start with a particular technology, and we think that's the technology. People who study the relationship between technology and society have consistently disputed this view of technology. For example, just for a mobile phone, you need somebody who is willing to sell it to you. You need somebody to provide electricity. You need somebody to maintain the phone. All kinds of things need to be in place in order for that mobile phone to really work. And of course, there's an entire ecosystem of an economy that supports all of those different components. And what's interesting is that many of these components are ultimately human in nature. They're either people or organizations that are composed of people, and without those people, the technology itself doesn't survive. And one way I will illustrate that is to suggest that if you have a technology and just the technology, just the gadget in hand, then within a few years, that technology will become obsolete. It will end up in a junk pile. That's the end of the technology. One reason why IICD succeeds at what it does, I think, is because it focuses on the larger system that involves human beings. And as long as you focus on human beings, there's something really interesting that happens, which is that even in an environment without the technology to begin with, they will build and maintain the technology that's required for them to do whatever it is that needs to be done. And what IICD does is to find organizations that are interested in using ICT and then help the organization develop the capacity to use technology in an effective way, such that when IICD withdraws, the organization is still capable of continuing its work with ICT. And this is, I believe these are the numbers that Carolina presented earlier when she mentioned that of the organizations that IICD works with in 2000, I think it was 2005, 30% were embedded, and more recently, 60% were embedded. So that means 60% of these organizations that were IICD partners are now able to work with ICT without IICD's explicit intervention. And to me, that is how real sustainability of a project happens, not that the provision of the ICT happens without taking care of the human side. Now, one way that outsiders can engage with developing countries, I think, is mentorship. And again, this is a model that IICD uses, even though it doesn't necessarily call it that. The thing about mentorship is that the goal is for the mentor not to do the actual work, but only to facilitate, to coach, to help connect with experts and so on. And the mentee is the entity that ultimately has to do the work, and through doing the work, they become independent so that eventually the mentor can disappear. And I think this model is really the one that at some level, we intuitively understand. There's a very well-known saying, if you give a person a fish, they eat for a day. If you teach them how to fish, they eat for a lifetime. And the interesting thing about the saying is that nobody suggests that you should build that person a turbocharged, heat-seeking, robotic fishing pole. And yet somehow many of us are very busy thinking about how can we create that technology that will help a person become a better fisherman. Really what you want is to help with that person's education, with their self-confidence, with their sense of justice, with their capacity to organize other fishermen, for example. And if you do those things, then they will naturally build the technology they need by themselves. Similarly for agriculture. So if you're interested in agriculture, again, the goal is not to develop a better technology for the farmer, but to help teach the farmer those skills and pieces of wisdom and knowledge that are required to be able to either incorporate create their own technology. And I want to also suggest that this is the same insight holds true for sustainability. It doesn't make any sense for us as the developed world to go to developing world and explain to them how they should be sustainable. But if we can provide them with the education, the self-confidence, the organizing capacity to become self-sustaining, then they will naturally tend in that direction because they have that capacity. Finally, I want to suggest that in order to be a good mentor, we also have to be good role models. And this is something that is true for all of the developed countries that are engaged in development. One of the things that I find very frustrating is the tendency for example, US foreign policy to try to ask developing countries to decrease their greenhouse emissions when the United States is by far the greatest emitter of carbon. It just doesn't make any sense. I'm not sure why these diplomats don't get sent home right away. But for some reason, the United States continues to do this. Ultimately, I think if we as developed countries don't change our habits, then developing countries will continue to see us as the role models, and that means consumption. One of the things I was really impressed by when I lived in India was the degree to which here's a country that is still very much developing, but they were taking cues from the developed world corporate trends. And so there was a tendency for corporations to advertise their green products. Of course, this is still very consumption-oriented, but that desire to be like what they saw to be a more desirable state of mind was there. And it was largely because developed countries are increasingly thinking about these things. I think the faster we can accelerate our process to getting to a place where we are truly sustainable, the more that will also trickle down to developing countries. I mentioned that IICD has this secret, which is that it's not really about ICT. And of course, I don't mean that it doesn't work with ICT, but primarily that, as it says in the logo, that it consistently puts people first. And I look forward to another great 15 years of IICD putting people first in development. Thank you.